Let's take a look at the timeline of ferry tragedies. Now, in June of 2016, a station wagon plunged into the sea. Joel Masindano, an accountant at KPA, perished, and the vehicle slid from MV Likoni. Now, this is according to a compilation by the Daily Nation. In September of 2016, a driver and his loader escaped death when their lorry with construction materials plunged into the ocean. In November of 2017, a station wagon slid into the sea. Mohamed Nyambwe escaped death. The car belonging to the Likoni Constituency Development Fund manager developed mechanical problems aboard MV Jambo. In May 2018, a petrol tanker driver escaped death when his vehicle failed to get up to the mainland side ramp from a ferry. And in July 2019, Salim Musa, a driver, and his stuntman Katana Ali survived when a truck belonging to the Mombasa maize millers plunged into the Indian Ocean. And on September 2019, which is the most recent incident, a minivan driven by Mariam Kigendi slid into the ocean as horrified MV Harambe passengers watched. She was with her daughter Amanda Mudeu, a pupil at MM Shah Academy in Mombasa. Their bodies are yet to be retrieved, as Kevin Mutai has told us. He's on location. He stays on that story. As soon as we have any updates, he will be bringing them to us. And now joining me in studio this morning to provide some insight is Byron Adera, who is an Pioneer X Kenya Special Forces officer. He's also a security expert, consultant, and the country spokesman of the Association of Corporate and Industrial Security Management Professionals. Happy to have you here.
Thank you.
Byron, sitting next to him in red is Lucy Ndungo. She's the Business Intelligence Manager at John Andrews Risk Management. And sitting next to her is Peter Kibet, an investigator, also with John Andrews Risk Management. Now, I'll start with you, Byron. Several questions have been raised. One of which is, why was there no ramp at the correct angle to keep the vehicle from rolling back? Second question is, why do we need a private firm to come in and help and provide oxygen tanks with sufficient capacity to reach the 60 meters? We are being told the vehicle is situated 60 meters deep. We're told the vehicle is situated. Why did we not have any lifeguards on board? Is it standard practice? So there are a lot of gaps, and it's not the first time this has happened, as we've I've just read through based on that compilation by the Daily Nation. So do you think there's been some laxity on the part of the Kenya Ferry Services?
Ideally, yes. It's a very sad situation that we're having this incident that did happen on the 29th of September. Come hot in the heels of several others that history and providence, if you may, have credited us with. The Kenyan Ferry Services ideally has had in its hands a lot of lessons. So ideally what we're seeing here is a deliberate, if you may, effort to throw the baby with the bathwater. It's very, very, very sad to note that even when we are talking against the backdrop of a properly constituted emergency or disaster response for that matter, then there's nothing to, not so much to write home about. It's not a question of only the ramp having been, actually touching the water or deeply plunging into the water, and not at 35 to 45 degrees as the regulations and good practice advise. It's not actually also on the part of only the laxity with which everybody else, talk about even the onlookers who are checking this situation. I mean, if you were to think about it critically, then this throws you back to, all historical incidents that have happened. In the US, you had the Kitty Genovese in 1964. So nowhere else is this more profoundly displayed, or the bystander effect, where everybody's watching a space. You and I were there, and we're looking at the onlookers. Videos have been flying up and down. Of everybody else looking at that space and thinking there could be someone else who's gonna, take action. But that someone else, critically, as a first responder, is the Kenya Ferry Services. So it's really, really sad that a number of factors confluence to make this space be surviving by mercy. I mean, I watched the interview that was granted the MD, Mr. Goa, and you immediately, thrown on the ground. You could be beating your head against a tree and wondering how then that organization survives with that level of leadership. Because we're told there was a guy that was called, And the AMD optimistically said he was an hour away. That's one person that was called and he's an hour away. You don't want a serious organization as Kenya Ferry Services that is charged with doing business, transporting 360,000 Kenyans from the mainland of Likoni, and of course joining Likoni and the island of Mombasa every single day. 2 million cars have been given as statistics that are transiting through that channel in a year. I mean, if you're talking about a perfect storm fallacy, this is coming to greet the hands of Kenya Ferry Services because of a plethora of failures. It's not just on the ramp alone, it's a lot of things that have come to confluence to visit disaster. And it's really sad, and the Nation newspapers correctly reported that if disaster like this were to happen any other day, then you're on your own.
Okay. Lucy, who do you hold accountable?
Before
Was it just bad fortune?
It is bad fortune, but first I want to send my condolences to the family of the deceased. I think we are living in unfortunate times. You've just read the timeline, meaning there's a lot that Kenya Ferry could go by to improving their standards. And I think also the leadership that was there on the ground, forget about the MD, those on the ferry, they were the ones who were there. They should have provided the leadership. The ferry didn't stop. It continued to the other side. Yet they had a problem that was taking place. Perhaps that was good judgment. They felt they can't stop where they are. Though there was one person I read on the internet that attempted to try and save the situation, jumped into the water with a rope to try and secure it on the vehicle, but it was too late. I wouldn't say that the bystander approach was harmful. I think it was prudent of the Wananchi that they didn't jump in, because perhaps most of them don't know how to swim.
They're not strong swimmers.
Yeah, they don't have good training like my colleague here. So why are they jumping in the first place? So the first thing in a crisis, you must secure your life. And if there is someone who is confident, then they can respond to the situation. Capacity in Kenya Ferry Services, and regionally, Tanzania ranks #2 of the worst countries where they've had crises. In 2011, they lost over 2,900 passengers, and they've not sat down and thought, how can we improve, how can we help one another to reduce the cases in this region? So we need to step up on maritime security and start talking a dialogue where we are putting passengers first. Those passengers were not just Kenyans. We get tourists who have come into the country. They have to go to South Coast, or they're coming back from South Coast to the mainland, to the island, and it's just scary. Also, I think government, I would point the blame to the government, because in the 90s there was talk, and early 2000 there was talk on building a bridge, and they opted to buy ferries. And if memory serves me right, there was one insurance company that took them to the Kenya ferries to court and said, the ferries that you're building are substandard. And somehow the whole thing was ignored. So security on the ferries is very questionable. We had the Mutongwe in 1994. And you can imagine that was the worst in Kenya. We're not talking about even in Lake Victoria. We have ferries there. So maritime security is very low in this country, and something needs to get done. The Minister of Transport should reconsider this service and think about a long-term project, a bridge. San Francisco, they put a bridge in the 19th century. Why can't we do the same? Yeah, we are now in the 21st century. Yeah.
Okay. Peter, I'd like you to come in at that point. Byron asked, why were people just standing by, shooting videos, taking pictures? Lucy says, if you're not a strong swimmer, the best thing you can do is stay on board. Are you a strong swimmer?
Myself? No,
yes.
no,
okay.
I wouldn't call myself
so you agree with Lucy?
Swimmer. Yes, I do, absolutely. I agree with Lucy that as a bystander, if at all you're aware that you're not capable of swimming to a certain level, or even at all, you're not supposed to engage yourself in anything that puts your life in danger and compromise.
But what would you have done in that situation?
You see, the concern is you can't put yourself at danger at the expense of trying to save someone else. Your life is always your first priority. So we have agencies in place who are supposed to take up that task.
So then we come back to the Kenya Ferry service.
Yeah, that is what we are questioning now about the Kenya Ferry service preparedness and ability to respond to tragedy when it hits. Because Kenya Ferry service has been there for a very long time. It's been operating in the region for very many years. They have well understanding and in-depth knowledge of the waters around the area, the depth. They know, like Byron mentioned, about 360,000 people use the ferry service every single day. That is a very large number of people to consider not putting up enough measures to ensure they are safe while they're using the service. So personally, I feel there's a lot of laxity in terms of how we implement and adopt measures. I'm sure they have a standard operating procedure on how safety should be undertaken around the area, but the problem boils down to how we implement those safety procedures. Because like the issue of the ramp, of course we've seen even right now, as your reporter was reporting, ferries are still operating and the ramps are still not raised.
Yeah, MV Harambee, which was involved in that incident, MV Kilindini, MV Nyayo, which have been in operation for more than 30 years, have the system that's operating their prows dysfunctional.
Yes, it raises a lot of questions, because if you understand that there are passengers on board, there's property on board, and the ramp is supposed to be raised, I don't think by any standard that a standard operating procedure says the ramp should not be raised. It's there for a purpose. Taking into account that issue that happened, the vehicle reversed into the water. I'm assuming if, like Byron said, the ramp was raised to that degree which is required, maybe the ramp will have come in place to at least prevent the vehicle from reversing into the water. So it raises a lot of questions in terms of laxity and responsibility in terms of the agency. But also, we can't just blame the agency, even the people who use the service. If you're on board the ferry, you need to be aware of your basic safety. You need to understand that if I do this, it's dangerous. The ferry was moving, so ideally there should be no movement within the ferry, even passengers being on board their cars or even
that has come up.
The engines running, such kind of things.
Is it in law that the passengers and the drivers are meant to disembark their vehicles, or is it just standard procedure?
There's loads and loads of standard procedure. If anything, in this country, we are not, impacted by all these threats and manifest risks because we are lacking in laws and regulations or policies or procedures. That's neither here nor there. It doesn't hold us to any close scrutiny if you are to simply get very simplistic about lack of regulations or sufficient laws. Those are there. But the bad news, and let me very quickly clarify on the bystander effect. The bystander effect has nothing to do with the bystanders themselves. It has everything to do with diffusion, responsibility, and ambiguity in the way people, organizations or people interpret what their businesses are. So in which case this was in reference to the Kenya ferry services. Everybody else was watching this space, perhaps even themselves, perhaps even the divers that they're talking about who are on the part of the Kenya Ports Authority, who they say are the first line responders to them. In their case, Mr. Gowa says he only provides, in terms of disaster response, he only provides onboard guards and firefighting equipment. Yes. I mean, if you were to do a thorough risk assessment or analysis for that matter, and then craft mitigation measures to settle into that space, I don't think fire is as bad a disaster if you were to have a look at a realistic picture of the reality for a Kenya ferry services that transiting people between one place to another on a channel that's 80 meters deep. It's not as much. Your immediate threat that would be very catastrophic could be people plunging into the water and having no rescue in place. So that in itself is reflective of, and it's one of the things that would add to the disadvantages of the bystander effect. Kitty Genovese in 1964 did produce a research finding that was done by Bibb Latney and John Daly in 1969, and they did it across the board of a wide range of students, body of university students, and they did find out that with ambiguity and diffusion responsibility, everybody's efforts or compulsion to take action diminish, become less and less with any additional number of people that are watching that space. So in a sense, everybody could be looking at that space. Kenya Ports Authority, Kenya Ferry Services, everybody else, and think, hey, someone else is going to take action. And at the end of the day, we are 48 hours later, and no proper action or exacting action has been taken.
Okay.
It's not about the people jumping into the, the water. It's not at all. So that's the bystander effect.
All right.
Now,
and I'll come back to you. I just want to add one more voice to the conversation. We're now joined by Pius Masai Mwachi in Kisumu County, and he is with Oko Kusa. Oko, I hand over to you. All right. Okay, Pius, I hear it's just yourself and myself. So a lot of questions, you've raised these questions yourself, Mr. Masai, on Facebook. The question of the ramp, the question of there being no lifeguards on board, the question of just there being a speedboat that can access the site of the, I don't want to call it a drowning yet, but the position on the water where the unfortunate incident happened. Do you think there was laxity on the part of the Kenya Ferry Services?
Actually, my colleagues, I appreciate that you approach these discussions live, and I want to put it clear to every person listening to me that it's unfortunate that we have lost lives where it shouldn't have happened, because first of all, we need what we call all hazard plans and emergency plans and standard operating procedures. You cannot operate these services of Kenya Ferry Services without emergency plans and standard operating procedures, because it's required a safety entry, a safety on board, and then safety exit. On daily operations, according to international standards, best practices, and observation of experts, it requires that when the ferry is being operated, we need to have the emergency plans in place, not just papers, but people doing the right thing at the right time, because when the ferry is operating, you expect anything will happen. And as I said before, people entering the ferry, they need a sensitization the way you just enter an aircraft. There's no difference. People, before they enter the ferry, they need a holding place where they should have been checked the safety, and then they are trained. Both vehicle in the vehicle, all papers in the vehicle, and those one as pedestrians. They need to understand the safety measures appertaining their transport while on the ferry. And at the same time, before this ferry takes off to the other side, we need to have on site an emergency plan operations management team, a team of a boat carrying divers, carrying medics in case of an emergency. We need to have ambulance on standby. By this I mean also even the water ambulance. And this is very simple things. You cannot operate a ferry and those plans are not there. So when looking in all of these things, the way things happened, it's important that every people need to understand their responsibilities, and people must take responsibilities, because as on my own observation and as an expertise and according to the standards, you cannot operate this business without emergency preparedness plans. Why? If that vehicle, for example, the way a vehicle can get off the ferry, the way it has happened in the past, not only this instant, it will be easy for the emergency speedboat to arrive there and save these people immediately. Just ask yourself, how long did that vehicle take sailing on top before even sinking? It took quite some time. If there were people on standby, they would have acted swiftly to save those people. So what I'm saying is we need to be fully prepared. And it's not a responsibility of one agency. It's a responsibility of all manned agencies. the Kenya Ferry does not belong to a few people. It's about all of us. It starts from the Kenya Ferry themselves as the stakeholder. They need to involve the KPA, KMA, the National Police Service, and all other stakeholders. And the emergency plans, as I know they have, and I don't know whether they used it, because it's important that the plans brings everything that they need to put in place to save lives, to save property, and to be ready in case of an emergency. How long will it take to call somebody to rescue someone in water? Why should you people be away other than being on the ground, just available to swing in case of an emergency? So I'm not blaming anyone, but it's important that investigation, when it's being conducted, it should be a wide investigation, ensuring that anyone who is responsible for any negligence must face the law. And this one must stop. Why should we lose lives? And we have the facilities. In this country, I say it's not about the facilities. And I thank the president of this country. He has put everything in place. We have people, but people must take responsibility. We don't act in a reaction way. What I've learned out of this country, and even that what has costed my job, because I left the government to work and support the government as supporting the civilian entity, bringing in issue of the preparedness, community approach. It is a responsibility of the individuals, the communities, agency-specific, workplaces, schools. People must be told, must be given information. You don't assume. Because what happened and what has been happening is people lack responsibility, and people must be fixed.
Thank you, Mr. Masai. I'd like to bring in our other panelists. Lucy, you know, all of you are saying you wouldn't like to point any fingers, but as we saw from the timeline, this is not the first time this is happening. Yes. Should heads roll?
They should. They should, because it's not the first time that it's happening. I think the Kenya Ferry services provided poor leadership. The first 1 hour as the night was falling, there should have been someone there from Kenya Ferry to begin briefing people, a PRO, someone, to take control in releasing the information to people out there. So there's a lot of panic, there was a lot of despair the whole night. Come the next day, there's no one there from Kenya Ferry. Stories of they're locked behind doors discussing. Then they come out and say they don't have the equipment. It took them more than 12 hours to figure out that they don't have equipment that is fit to go down there and retrieve the bodies. For me, that was totally unacceptable. But just going back to what our colleague in Kisumu has said, his approach is very expensive. It's very expensive because he's wanting the entire security agencies to be there. Now, what Kenya Ferry Services should have done is to develop an emergency section within themselves. It's still government because it's government owned. They should think about emergency rescue. We do have a center of disaster management in this country, but I think they're based only in Nairobi. They should think about how can we address to situations surrounding water bodies. The lady who was being interviewed, the diver, the master diver, she talked of an incident in Mutongwe where they retrieved a child from the waters. So it means we do have divers who are there. There's one who has been on the internet complaining that he's not recognized in his efforts, yet people want him to risk his life. So I think the whole area of marine security, we need to begin to build bridges, collaborate with one another. Those in private sector, I don't want to call them volunteers. Those who are there on the ground, they can work together immediately, almost immediately, to save the situation. But resources have to be allocated. And going back to what my colleague was saying earlier regarding the standards, internationally,
and you did mention divers. On the screen we have pictures of live pictures of the divers going in.
Yeah, but we do have international mechanisms that do give not only ferries but also ships the standards in which they're supposed to operate in, how the vessel is supposed to be maintained. All those standards have been set out for the ferries. In different countries, you will see they're clearly demarked where vehicles are to board and they're not beyond a certain section. The loading bay, the low board, at what level it's supposed to be at. And the ferry cannot move if it is low, because if water comes in to the ferry, say there is a storm or high tide, then it's a recipe for disaster. The entire ferry can capsize. Now, such things, I don't think Kenya Ferry Services really factors in.
Okay.
In fact, we are just putting on people on board and saying good luck. If you get to the other side, well and good. If not, but we need proper plans, and there should be laws. We have road laws, yeah, the road safety and all that. There was a show before where one of your journalists was talking to AA, and they were talking about road safety. So what about safety on such vessels? Who is the oversight on ferries to ensure that those standards are being maintained throughout, that the ferry is in good working condition? There was the issue of fire that was raised. There was a case in Norway where fire broke out on a ship and it killed 2 people. So fire systems is also very important because it's a threat, a terror threat. Yeah, we don't have CCTV cameras there to show us who is boarding and what are they carrying, as the colleague was saying, screening and all that that needs to take prior entering the vessel. So there is a lot, there are many gaps that are there. And we need an oversight to ensure that the Kenya ferries are doing their job. But most importantly, we need an emergency rescue service for all our water bodies.
All right.
Yeah.
Now, there's something that you raised, and that's a cost factor that Mr. Masai also raised, Peter, before I come to you. Mr. Masai, what do you say to Lucy's counter that what you're proposing would be very expensive, having all these agencies incorporated?
Yes, being on site there.
What do you say to that?
There's some noise at the background. I'm not getting your question clearly. Can those people stop the noise and then please bring the question correctly? I've not got it correctly, please.
All right, Mr. Masai, let me put it to you again. Lucy is saying what you're proposing as far as having all the different agencies on site would be a very costly affair. What do you have to say to that?
No. Let me tell you a best practice. I said one thing. We are losing people that should not have lost. There is nothing is costly as life. And there's nothing even should be carried from Nairobi. Don't mention Nairobi. National Disaster Operations Center, they are in Nairobi. But on the ground, we have people from the ferry themselves. We have the KMA, we have the KPA, the police are there, the St. John's are there, the Red Cross are there. What is lacking? There's nothing lacking. Even the Kenya Navy is just next there. So what I'm saying, let us not give people wrong information in terms of the preparedness. It's a very cheap affair because everybody is in the ground, but people are not doing their work. Can I ask you a very simple question? Where is the safety officer? A ferry cannot leave from one point to another without a safety officer. A safety officer must give the guidance to the coxswain, all safety measures. Because if we say that National Disaster Operations Center, they are in Nairobi, National Disaster Management Unit, they are in Nairobi, no. About disaster preparedness is bringing them to the community. It's about the Kenya Ferry Services and stakeholders. Nothing is expensive. There are a lot of resources required from outside. They have everything in place. What is there? People are not doing their work. Let's face the point by itself. People must do their work. It's not about saying that nothing is missing and nothing is expensive than life.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Masai. What do you have to say to what Mr. Masai has to say, that we have all the facilities in place, we have sufficiently qualified personnel in place, it's just that people slept on the job?
Well, I agree. We have very multiple agencies who can help during disaster. But then looking at some of the agencies that Pius has mentioned, the Kenya Navy, the Ports Authority, the ferry service itself. If we don't have a centralized emergency response team or procedure, it's still going to be difficult to coordinate with those agencies on how to respond quickly. Because if you even look at the issue of the Kenya Navy, for you to scramble a team from the Kenya Navy to respond to an emergency that is happening on site, how long will it take before the Kenya Navy gets there?
According to Goa, he said 20 minutes.
20 minutes. In 20 minutes, someone will already be so gone. So I think it will be more appropriate if we can actually come up with a framework so that we have an emergency team on standby on site, not just for the ferry issue or issues to do with water, but even in other areas where emergencies can occur, so that when there's an issue, the team can respond quickly, even before it gets worse. Okay. It's very sad that up to 48 hours later, we still haven't recovered the bodies, we haven't recovered the vehicle, the family and the friends are in distress. It's very, very, very heartbreaking. Okay. And I think we really need to do something.
All right.
If we're sleeping at work, people need to wake up.
Lucy, you brought up the issue of CCTV cameras, and I just want to make a point before I go to Byron. In June last year, according to the Daily Nation story in report in today's paper, KFS said it had awarded a 78 million shilling contract to a company to install security cameras on its vessel. So that's a good point to note. We want to know what happened with that. Now,
yes, it would answer the question of why was the engine running? What happened? Why was she reversing, if she was indeed reversing? Because the CCTV camera can be able to tell us why she was in distress. Right now, we can only hypothesize. Maybe this was happening, maybe it went into the wrong gear. We don't know. We can only guess. But with that footage and the footage that the bystander took, that's the only thing that we have that can tell us the story. For me, it is a story about this lady and her child who were unfortunate to be on that ferry on that particular day. And there were no measures that were there to help her, to save her life. But also I want to step it up a bit and talk about you, the victim in that situation. And especially after the Westgate situation we had, a lot was spoken by our security experts, and they encouraged us that if you find yourself in a situation, see how you can save yourself. And I think it's about time that we who are using such facilities to start thinking that if I'm caught out in this situation, or let me take another example. If you're driving along a road and you find that the river has burst and it's coming for you, or there's a flash flood, what can you do to save yourself? We must start thinking in that way so that we are not totally victims, that we can try and save ourselves. Like the case of the oil tanker and the maize mill trailer where we know that the drivers actually jumped out. They saved themselves and they left their cargo to go into the ocean. I think we should learn how to do that. And I can understand the dilemma. How was she going to save herself and have a child in that situation? Okay. So again, goes back to why wasn't she not out of the car? Where was the supervisor or the one who is in charge of the deck not going around checking that everybody's out of the car? Because today if you ask the husband, would you want your car or your wife and child? He would say, I want my wife and child. All yeah. Right. So the heads must roll, beginning from those who are working on that ferry, and also way up, because they've done nothing since our first disaster on the ferries.
Okay.